The luxurious first-class cabin fell silent when the flight attendant blocked Olivia's path. "Ma'am, I think there's been a mistake. This section is for first-class passengers only," said Heather Wilson, the head flight attendant, her voice dripping with condescension as she examined Olivia's modest dress. The wealthy passenger's stares pierced Olivia like daggers as her legitimate ticket was openly questioned. Tall and perfectly groomed, Heather wore her auburn hair in a tight bun, her crisp navy uniform adorned with gold stripes that she seemed to wear as badges of superiority rather than service. "I have a first-class ticket," Olivia responded calmly, extending her boarding pass. Heather took it with her fingertips as if fearing contamination, her French manicured nails gleaming under the cabin lights. There seems to be some kind of error," she replied, her perfectly shaped eyebrows rising in doubt. "Perhaps you were incorrectly entered into the system." She made a show of examining the ticket from multiple angles, her lips pursed in exaggerated skepticism. A man in an expensive suit looked up from his financial newspaper, his gold cufflinks catching the light as he lowered his reading glasses. "Happens all the time," he commented loudly. "Economy class is getting too crowded these days." Several first-class passengers glanced up, some with barely concealed smirks, others with uncomfortable curiosity. A couple in matching designer outfits whispered to each other, their eyes darting between Olivia and her modest attire. Heather smiled with false sympathy, her teeth blindingly white. "Let me check if there's a place for you in the back of the plane. I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable there." The emphasis on comfortable carried a clear message. You don't belong here. Olivia felt her face burn, a flush creeping up her neck. "Please check again." "My husband purchased this seat specifically for me," she maintained her poise, years of professional training as a flight attendant herself coming to her aid. "Your husband?" A woman with a diamond necklace the size of a small grape laughed softly, her voice dripping with condescension. "Darling, everyone says something like that when they want an upgrade. Next you'll tell us he's a CEO or something equally creative." Discreet laughter rippled through the cabin as Heather motioned to another crew member, exchanging knowing looks. Olivia touched the watch Alexander had given her the day they met, when she was still a flight attendant herself. The cool metal against her skin centered her. Memories of the simpler life she led before meeting him gave her strength. She had faced prejudice before, but never expected to encounter it from colleagues in the profession she had once loved. A businessman nearby tapped impatiently on his armrest. "Some of us have meetings to get to," he commented to no one in particular. "Can we resolve whatever this is and take off?" Heather straightened her already perfect posture. "Please wait here while I resolve this misunderstanding," she said with an artificial smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps it's better if you wait at the boarding gate while we clarify the situation." Her tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Olivia felt a wave of conflicting emotions, embarrassment, indignation, and a flicker of anger. She could easily mention that she was the wife of Alexander Harrington, principal shareholder of Aurora Airways. One word from her could change everything in an instant, but something inside her resisted. Why should she need her husband's name to be treated with dignity? The cabin manager approached, his expression serious beneath his perfectly positioned hat. "Ma'am, it appears we have a problem with your reservation. I'll need to ask you to accompany me off the aircraft while we resolve this." His tone was professional but firm, brooking no argument. The looks of pity and disdain from the other passengers weighed on her as Olivia struggled to maintain her dignity. A woman in her 60s, wearing what appeared to be a full set of sapphires, clicked her tongue disapprovingly. A young executive typing on his laptop barely suppressed a smirk. Olivia stood her ground, her voice quiet but steady. "My ticket is valid. I have every right to be here." Heather's smile tightened. "Security protocols, ma'am. We can't have just anyone sitting in first class without proper verification." Just anyone? The words hung in the air, laden with implication. It was at that moment that the aircraft door opened again with deliberate precision, revealing the imposing silhouette of Alexander Harrington. Standing 6'2" with broad shoulders, his presence commanded attention without effort. His impeccable charcoal gray suit, tailored to perfection, contrasted with his confident, relaxed posture. Silver threads at his temples added distinction to his otherwise dark hair, cut in an executive style that spoke of power without ostentation. The cabin fell silent. Alexander's emerald eyes, sharp and observant, scanned the space methodically, before locking on to Olivia being confronted by the staff. His expression remained neutral, but those who knew him might recognize the slight tightening around his eyes, a warning sign of the controlled fury building beneath his composed exterior. "Olivia," Alexander's voice was deep and measured, yet somehow filled the entire cabin. "Is there a problem?" Heather and the manager exchanged panicked glances, uncertainty replacing their previous confidence. "Sir, we're just resolving a small seating confusion," the manager explained, his tone suddenly solicitous, body language shifting to accommodate this unexpected variable. Alexander walked down the aisle with the unhurried confidence of someone who owned not just the plane, but the very air around him. Each deliberate step brought him closer to the confrontation, passengers shrinking back instinctively as he passed. "But that's my wife's seat, correct? 2A. His accent carried the faintest hint of his Welsh heritage, giving his words a melodic quality that belied their authority. "Your wife?" Heather repeated, the color draining from her face like water from a broken vessel. The whisper that traveled through the cabin was immediate and electric. Alexander positioned himself beside Olivia, one hand gently touching the small of her back, a gesture both protective and claiming. His six-figure watch gleamed subtly on his wrist, not ostentatious but unmistakably valuable to the knowing eye. "Yes, Olivia Mendez Harrington, my wife. Has there been an issue with her accommodation?" His question, though phrased politely, carried the unmistakable weight of someone accustomed to getting answers. The manager's composure cracked visibly. "Mr. Harrington, we had no idea. We were just following protocol to verify." "Verify what?" "Exactly?" Alexander asked, his gaze steady and penetrating as it moved deliberately from the manager to Heather, pinning each in turn. "Whether she belongs in first class based on her appearance?" The cabin fell into absolute silence, the kind that seems to swallow even the sound of breathing, as the realization of who he was and the magnitude of their mistake began to dawn on everyone present. "Mr. Harrington, we didn't know," Heather stammered, her face now completely pale. All previous arrogance evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. The badge on her uniform visibly trembled with her shaking, the gold pins catching light with each nervous movement. Sweat beaded along her hairline, threatening her perfect makeup. Alexander's presence seemed to expand, filling the cabin with an almost palpable energy. Though he hadn't raised his voice or made any aggressive movements, the power dynamic had shifted seismically. At 45, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built an empire from the ground up, not through inheritance or luck, but through intelligence and unwavering determination. "Clearly," he replied, the single word hanging in the air like a verdict. Alexander carefully observed the scene, his eyes registering every detail. Olivia's embarrassment, her shoulders slightly hunched despite her efforts to appear composed. The now wide-eyed looks of the passengers, some frantically tapping on their phones as they recognized him. The flight crew's sudden, almost comical shift in posture from authoritative to servile in seconds. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried an authority that made each word weigh like lead. "Did you know that before we married, Olivia was the youngest head flight attendant in the history of Aurora Airways?" His hand remained protectively at the small of Olivia's back. "She understands more about protocol and service than probably everyone in this cabin combined." An audible sigh ran through the seats. The woman with the diamond necklace who had mocked Olivia now intensely studied the in-flight magazine, her fingers nervously twisting her gold wedding band. The businessman who had complained about delays suddenly found his shoes fascinating. She once prevented a mid-air emergency by noticing a passenger's symptoms before even the man himself realized something was wrong. Alexander continued, a hint of pride warming his measured tone. "Saved his life. The airline gave her a commendation that's still displayed at headquarters, though I'm beginning to wonder if anyone here has actually seen it." Heather's complexion had gone from pale to ashen. The manager tugged nervously at his collar, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. Alexander continued, his tone unchanged. I asked for the flight to wait for my arrival because I wanted to surprise my wife. It seems I arrived at an opportune moment. The pause before opportune spoke volumes, a masterclass in understated threat. He turned to the manager who now clutched his hat in front of him like a shield. As the majority shareholder of Aurora Airways, I am deeply concerned about what I've witnessed here today. The words majority shareholder fell like a silent bomb in the cabin. A passenger, near the window, audibly gasped. Heather had to lean against the back of a seat to remain standing, her knuckles white where she gripped the leather. Mr. Harrington, the manager began, his voice cracking slightly. I can assure you this was an isolated misunderstanding. Alexander raised his hand, the simple gesture immediately silencing the man. Misunderstandings have consequences, don't they? His tone was almost conversational, making the implied threat all the more potent. He pulled his phone from his pocket, typing, quickly with decisive movements. I've just sent an email to the board. Starting tomorrow, all Aurora Airways employees will undergo a new anti-discrimination training program. He looked directly at Heather, his gaze unwavering. Miss Wilson, you'll have the honor of being the first participant. Heather swallowed hard, unable to respond, her career flashing before her eyes. The silver wings pin on her uniform, once worn with such pride, now seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. As for the position of Director of Customer Experience that we were discussing filling, Alexander continued, turning to the manager. I believe my wife, with her previous experience at the company and her recent experience as a customer, will be perfectly qualified to take over, if she wishes. Olivia's eyes widened slightly. This was the first time she had heard of such a position. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she composed herself. Alexander then addressed the passengers, his voice projected for all to hear, but without raising it. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. As compensation, champagne will be complimentary throughout the flight. Then, just for Heather, he added in a lower tone that still carried to those nearby, please ensure my wife receives appropriate attention during the flight. Your future with the company depends on it. Heather nodded silently, her empire of arrogance completely crumbling before everyone. The transformation was complete, from imperious authority figure to humble servant in the span of minutes. She stepped back, motioning to the other flight attendants to begin service immediately. No one in the cabin missed the irony or the lesson. The businessmen who had been dismissive now looked on with newfound respect, not just for Alexander's power, but for Olivia's dignity throughout the ordeal. At the luxurious beachfront resort, Olivia and Alexander shared a glass of wine on the private balcony of their suite, the sunset tinting the ocean in golden hues. The flight, after the initial confrontation, had proceeded in tense silence, with Heather avoiding eye contact while serving Olivia with an almost painful deference. You always knew how to make an entrance, Olivia commented, a small smile playing on her lips. Alexander laughed softly. This wasn't how I planned our reunion, he admitted, holding her hand. But I confess it was satisfying to see their expressions. Olivia contemplated the ocean for a moment. You know, for years I've avoided using your name or position. I wanted to be recognized for my own merits, not as Mrs. Harrington. And you achieved that, Alexander affirmed. The charity event you organized raised more money for underprivileged children than any other in the Foundation's history. Still, Olivia hesitated, touching the watch he had given her years ago. Sometimes I miss my independence, the career I was building. Alexander studied her face for a moment. That's why I created the position of Director of Customer Experience. It's not a favor, Olivia. It's because there's no one more qualified. Olivia looked at him in surprise. You planned this before the incident on the plane? Alexander smiled. It was going to be your anniversary gift. You have the experience, the vision, and now, after today, you know exactly what needs to be changed. Olivia felt unexpected tears in her eyes. You never stopped believing in my potential, even when I doubted myself. Alexander gently touched the watch on her wrist. Remember what I said when I gave you this? That time is the only luxury that truly matters, how we choose to use it, and with whom. Olivia nodded, remembering the young businessman she had met years ago when she served coffee in first class. That flight attendant taught me more about dignity and excellence in a 3-hour flight than I learned in years of business meetings, Alexander continued. I didn't fall in love with Mrs. Harrington, the billionaire's wife. I fell in love with Olivia Mendez, the woman who treated all passengers, from the CEO to the child traveling alone, with the same unwavering respect. Olivia squeezed his hand, the sunset reflecting on the watch that marked not just the hours, but the journey they had shared. So, Alexander asked softly, what does the future director of customer experience think about transforming Aurora Airways? Olivia smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. I think it's time for a new chapter,